I'm Nicole Carter, 33, a cardiothoracic surgeon. The scalpel trembled in my hand for exactly 3 seconds before muscle memory took over. Through the glass of the observation deck, I could see him lying on the table, his gray hair thinner now, his skin papery and pale under the surgical lights. 20 years had carved deep lines around his eyes, but I'd recognize those hands anywhere. The same hands that had turned the basement lock. Dr. Carter? My resident's voice cut through the hum of the prep. The patient's family is asking if you'd like to speak with them before we begin. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, watching the anesthesiologist check Richard Brennan's vitals. My stepfather. The man who taught me that tears were weakness, that emotion was something to be buried in dark places where no one could hear you scream. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's scrub in. The hallway to the scrub room stretched longer than usual, each step echoing against sterile walls that suddenly felt too much like concrete. I could smell the antiseptic soap, sharp and clinical, but underneath it lurked something else, the musty scent of a basement that never quite left my memory. Focus, Nicole. You're a surgeon. You save lives. But as I pushed through the doors, I heard it, a sound that made my chest tighten. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying. Just a patient's sibling in the waiting room? Probably, but the sound clawed at something deep inside me. I stopped walking. Doctor? The scrub nurse looked concerned. Are you all right? I was 13 again, tears streaming down my face as the basement door clicked shut above me. Stop being so dramatic, Nicole. My mother's voice, tired and dismissive. Richard's just trying to teach you some self-control. The crying stopped. The hallway fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors and the whisper of ventilation systems. I looked down at my hands, steady now, surgeons' hands that had saved hundreds of lives. Hands that had learned precision in the dark. I'm fine, I said, moving toward the scrub station. Let's save a life. But as I began the ritual of washing, fingers, palms, wrists, forearms, I caught my reflection in the mirror above the sink. For just a moment, I saw her again. The 13-year-old girl who'd learned to cry silently, who'd counted ceiling tiles in the dark until the numbers became her prayer. The water was warm against my skin, washing away everything except the question that had haunted me for 2 decades. What do you do when the person who broke you needs you to put them back together? I dried my hands with mechanical precision, each movement practiced and sure. Through the window, I could see the team positioning Richard for surgery. His chest rose and fell with artificial rhythm, vulnerable and exposed under the lights. My phone buzzed against the counter, a text from the charge nurse. Family wants to know estimated surgery time. Also, patient's wife insists on speaking with you personally before you begin. Says it's urgent. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Richard's wife. My mother. The woman who'd chosen him over me, who'd stood by while he locked away her daughter's tears. Who'd called me dramatic for feeling too much, for being too much, for existing too loudly in their perfectly controlled world. She was here, in my hospital, waiting to see me. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. The scrub room door opened behind me, and I heard footsteps approaching. Slow, hesitant steps that I recognized even after all these years. I didn't turn around, couldn't turn around, but I saw her reflection appear in the mirror beside mine. Hello, Nicole. My mother's voice, older now but still carrying that same tone of careful disappointment. I watched her in the mirror, silver hair pulled back, lines around her eyes that spoke of years I hadn't been part of. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. Mom. The word felt foreign on my tongue. I know this must be difficult for you. She stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume, the same floral scent she'd worn when I was young. But Richard needs the surgery. He needs you. I finally turned to face her, and for a moment we just stood there, 2 women separated by 20 years of silence and a lifetime of unspoken truths. He's been asking for you, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Ever since we found out you were the surgeon. He wants to apologize. The words hit me like a physical blow. After all these years, after building a life from the broken pieces he'd left behind, he wanted to apologize. As if sorry could unlock all those basement doors, could give back all those tears I'd learned to swallow. "I have to go," I said, moving toward the doors. "He's my patient now. That's all." But as I reached for the door handle, my mother's voice stopped me cold. "Nicole, wait. There's something else. Something I never told you about that night you left for college." I froze, my hand on the metal handle. The night I'd walked out of their house with nothing but a scholarship and a promise to myself that I'd never be powerless again. "What?" I asked, not turning around. "The basement door," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "It was never locked." The words hung in the air between us like a blade. I felt the world tilt, felt everything I'd believed about my childhood shift and crack. The door was never locked. All those hours in the dark, all those tears cried in silence. I could have walked out any time. I could have walked out any time. The doors swung open, and suddenly I was face to face with my resident, his eyes wide with concern. "Dr. Carter, we need you now. The patient's pressure is dropping and—" He stopped mid-sentence, looking between my mother and me, sensing the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Richard was dying on the table, and I was the only one who could save him. The man who'd taught me that I was too much, too dramatic, too broken to deserve love. He needed my hands to keep his heart beating. And somewhere in the space between my mother's revelation and the urgent beeping of monitors, I realized that the girl who'd counted ceiling tiles in an unlocked basement had grown up to hold life and death in her palms. The question was, what was I going to do with that power? The felt different this time, smaller, more intimate, like a confessional booth bathed in surgical lights. Richard lay before me, his chest prepped and draped, the monitors painting his vital signs in green and amber across the screens. His heart rate was erratic, blood pressure dropping steadily. Time was running out. "Scalpel," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. The blade felt heavier than usual as I made the first incision, parting skin and muscle with practiced precision. But my hands, these hands that had never failed me, trembled slightly as I worked. The basement door was never locked. The words echoed in my mind with each beat of the heart monitor. "Pressure still dropping," my resident, Dr. Martinez, reported. "Should we increase the vasopressors?" "Not yet." I deepened the incision, exposing the sternum. "Let's see what we're working with first." But as I reached for the bone saw, something made me pause. There, just visible beneath the surgical drape, was a scar on Richard's left wrist. Thin, white, old, the kind of scar that comes from broken glass or a sharp edge. I'd never noticed it before, but then again, I'd spent most of my childhood trying not to look at him too closely. The saws were filled the ore as I cut through bone, each vibration traveling up my arms and settling somewhere deep in my chest. I was opening him up, literally exposing his heart, and all I could think about was that unlocked door. "Jesus," Dr. Martinez breathed as we lifted away the sternum. "Look at that." Richard's heart was a mess, scarred tissue everywhere, arteries so blocked they looked like old garden hoses left out in the sun. But it wasn't the damage that made me catch my breath. It was the tattoo. There, inked in fading blue across the muscle of his left ventricle, was a single word, "Nicole." My name. On his heart. "Dr. Carter?" The perfusionist's voice seemed to come from very far away. "His pressure's critical. We need to get him on bypass now." I stared at that tattoo, my mind reeling. When had he gotten it? Why? The Richard the First remembered wouldn't have done something so sentimental, so dramatic. "Doctor?" Dr. Martinez touched my arm gently. "We need to move." I snapped back to the present, muscle memory taking over as we connected Richard to the heart-lung machine. The steady whoosh of the bypass pump filled the room, taking over the work his damaged heart couldn't do. For now, a machine was keeping him alive while I decided whether to save him. "There's extensive scarring around the LAD," I said, focusing on the surgery, on the familiar rhythm of repair and reconstruction. "We'll need to do a triple bypass at minimum." As I worked, harvesting vessels from his leg for the grafts, I found myself studying his body with new eyes. More scars, some surgical, some not. A burn mark on his shoulder that looked old, maybe from childhood. Calluses on his hands that spoke of manual labor, though I'd never known him to work with his hands. Dr. Carter, the anesthesiologist, called out. His wife is asking for an update. Should I tell her we're proceeding normally? My mother, still waiting, still hoping I'd save the man who'd shaped my childhood with locked doors and silent tears. Except the doors were never locked. That changed everything, didn't it? Tell her we're working, I said, beginning the delicate process of attaching the first graft. No other details. But as I sutured the new vessel to his heart, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Crying. Soft, muffled sobs coming from somewhere in the OR. I looked around, but everyone was focused on their tasks. The crying continued, and suddenly I was 13 again, sitting in that basement, learning to muffle my own sobs so he wouldn't hear me upstairs. Do you hear that? I asked Dr. Martinez. He looked confused. Hear what? The crying stopped. The OR fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of life support. I realized my hands had stopped moving, the suture half completed. Nothing, I said, forcing myself to continue. Just nothing. But as I worked on the second graft, the memories came flooding back with surgical precision. The basement wasn't just a punishment. It was where I'd learned to be alone with my thoughts, where I'd planned my escape, where I'd promised myself I'd become someone who could never be locked away again. The door was never locked, which meant every hour I'd spent down there, every tear I'd cried in the dark, every moment I'd felt trapped and powerless, I'd chosen it. I'd chosen to stay. Why? I whispered, not realizing I'd spoken aloud until Dr. Martinez looked up. Why what, doctor? I stared down at Richard's open chest, at my name tattooed on his heart, at the careful stitches holding his life together. Why would someone tattoo a name on their heart? Dr. Martinez glanced at the tattoo, then back at me. Love, maybe? Guilt? Sometimes people do crazy things when they're trying to make amends. Amends. The word hit me like a scalpel to the chest. All those years I'd carried the weight of being unwanted, unloved, too dramatic for my own family. But what if I'd been wrong? What if the locked door was never about keeping me in, but about giving me a choice? Third graft's ready, I announced, my voice steadier now. Let's finish this. As I attached the final bypass, I found myself thinking about the girl in the basement. She'd counted ceiling tiles and planned her future, dreamed of becoming someone important, someone who mattered. She'd used those dark hours to build the foundation of who she'd become. Maybe the door being unlocked wasn't about my failure to leave. Maybe it was about my choice to stay until I was ready to go. Coming off bypass, I called out, watching the monitors as we slowly weaned Richard from the machine. Let's see if this heart wants to work. For a moment, nothing happened. The monitors showed flatline, silence, the absence of life. Then, slowly, a rhythm appeared. Weak at first, then stronger. His heart, scarred and damaged but repaired, began to beat on its own. Beautiful work, Dr. Carter, Dr. Martinez said, and I could hear the admiration in his voice. But as we prepared to close, something caught my eye. There, tucked beneath the edge of the surgical drape, was an envelope. It must have fallen from Richard's gown when we'd prepped him. My name was written on it in handwriting I recognized, shaky now, but unmistakably his. I picked up the envelope with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of whatever was inside. A letter. After 20 years of silence, he'd written me a letter. Dr. Carter? The circulating nurse was holding the sutures, waiting for me to close the chest. Are you ready to proceed? I looked down at Richard's face, peaceful now under anesthesia, then at the envelope in my hand. Whatever was inside could wait. Right now, I had a life to finish saving. But as I began closing his chest, layer by layer, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover something that would change everything I thought I knew about my childhood, about my family, about the girl who'd sat in an unlocked basement and chosen to stay in the dark. The final suture was in place when the alarm started screaming. Richard's blood pressure plummeted, his heart rhythm became chaotic, and suddenly the OR erupted into controlled chaos. "He's going into VFib," Dr. Martinez shouted. "Charging the paddles." I looked at the monitors, at the wild, erratic lines that meant his heart was dying, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. We'd fixed the blockages, repaired the damage, given him every chance to live. But sometimes, even perfect surgery isn't enough. "Clear," I called out, placing the paddles on his chest. The shock sent his body arcing off the table, but the monitor showed no change. Still VFib. Still dying. "Again," I said, charging the paddles. "Clear." Another shock. Another moment of hope. But the rhythm remained chaotic, his heart refusing to accept the life we'd tried to give it back. In the observation deck, I could see my mother's silhouette pressed against the glass, watching her husband die despite everything I'd done to save him. The envelope crinkled in my pocket as I reached for the paddles again. Whatever Richard had wanted to tell me, whatever apology or explanation or truth he'd written down, I was about to lose my chance to hear it forever. Unless I could bring him back from the edge of death one more time. "Charging to 360, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "This is our last shot." The paddles felt like lightning in my hands as I pressed them against Richard's chest one final time. "Clear." His body convulsed, arcing off the table like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. For 3 eternal seconds, the monitor showed nothing but chaos. Then, slowly, a rhythm emerged. Weak, irregular, but unmistakably alive. "We've got him back," Dr. Martinez breathed, his voice thick with relief. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Richard's pressure was barely holding, his heart struggling against the trauma of surgery and cardiac arrest. We moved him to the ICU in tense silence, every beep of the monitor a small victory against the darkness that had nearly claimed him. Hours later, I sat in my office staring at the envelope. The letter felt heavier than it should, weighted with 20 years of unspoken words. Through my window, I could see the sun setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. My hands shook as I opened it. "Nicole, if you're reading this, it means I'm either dead or close enough to it that you've had to cut me open to keep me breathing. Either way, I figure I owe you some truths. The basement door was never locked. Your mother told you that today, didn't she? I can see it in your face even now, 20 years later, that look you get when the world shifts under your feet. You always were too smart for your own good. But here's what she didn't tell you, what I made her promise never to tell you. I didn't send you to the basement to punish you for crying. I sent you there to save you from me." My breath caught in my throat. The words blurred as tears I hadn't expected began to fall. "You see, Nicole, when you cried, something broke inside me. Not because you were being dramatic. God, you were never dramatic. You were just a child feeling things the way children should. But when I heard those tears, I heard my own father's voice telling me that boys don't cry, that emotion is weakness, that love is something you earn through silence and submission. And I was terrified that I would do to you what he did to me. The basement wasn't a prison, sweetheart. It was a sanctuary. A place where you could feel everything you needed to feel without me standing over you, fighting the urge to silence you the way I'd been silenced. The door was never locked because I trusted you to come back when you were ready. And you always did." I had to stop reading, my vision too blurred to make out the words. All those years I'd thought he was punishing me for being too much, when really he was protecting me from becoming too little. I know this doesn't excuse anything. I know I should have been stronger, should have broken the cycle instead of just managing it. But I was a coward, Nicole. I was so afraid of becoming my father that I became something worse, a man who loved his daughter so much he couldn't bear to be in the same room when she needed him most. The tattoo on my heart, yes, I know you saw it during surgery. I got it the day you graduated medical school. I wasn't there, couldn't be there, because I knew my presence would only remind you of everything I'd failed to give you. But I watched the live stream from my car in the parking lot, and when they called your name, when you walked across that stage in your cap and gown, I knew that the girl who'd counted ceiling tiles in my basement had become exactly who she was meant to be. You saved yourself, Nicole. In that basement. In the dark. You built the foundation of who you'd become. And now you save others. You've become everything I was too broken to teach you to be. A knock on my office door interrupted my reading. "Come in," I called, quickly wiping my eyes. Dr. Martinez entered, his expression serious. "Richard's awake. He's asking for you." I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my coat pocket. "How is he?" "Stable. Weak but stable. His wife is with him." Martinez paused at the door. "Dr. Carter? That was some of the finest surgery I've ever witnessed. The way you brought him back, it was like you were fighting for more than just his life." I was fighting for the truth, for understanding, for the chance to see my childhood through different eyes. The ICU was dimly lit, machines humming their electronic lullabies around Richard's bed. My mother sat beside him, holding his hand, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red with tears. "Nicole," she whispered. "Thank you." Richard's eyes fluttered open as I approached his bed. They were the same blue eyes I remembered, but softer now, clouded with pain medication and something that looked like relief. "Nicole," he said, his voice barely audible through the oxygen mask. You read it?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "I'm sorry," he continued, each word an effort. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be what you needed." I pulled a chair close to his bed, sitting down so we were eye level. For the first time in 20 years, I really looked at him. Not as the man who'd sent me to the basement, but as someone who'd been broken long before I was born. "The door was never locked," I said quietly. He nodded, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. "I wanted you to know you always had a choice. Even when I couldn't give you anything else, I could give you that. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you explain?" Richard's hand moved slightly on the blanket, and I found myself reaching for it. His fingers were cold, fragile, nothing like the hands I'd feared as a child. "Because," he whispered, "I was afraid you'd forgive me. And I didn't deserve that. I still don't." My mother leaned forward, her voice breaking. "Nicole, there's more. Things I should have told you years ago." I looked between them, seeing not the parents who'd failed me, but two people who'd been drowning in their own damage, trying to keep me from going under with them. "Tell me," I said. "Your father, your biological father. He left when you were 2 because I wouldn't stop you from crying. He said you were too loud, too needy, that children should be seen and not heard." My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "When I married Richard, I was so afraid he'd leave too. So when you cried, when you showed emotion, I panicked. I thought if I could just make you quieter, smaller, more manageable." "You thought you could keep him," I finished. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "But Richard never wanted you to be smaller. He didn't know how to handle his own feelings, let alone yours. The basement was his compromise. A place where you could be yourself without triggering his own trauma." I sat back in my chair, the weight of 20 years of misunderstanding settling over me like a heavy blanket. All this time, I'd thought I was unwanted, unloved, too much for my own family. But really, I'd been caught in the crossfire of their own broken histories. "I became a surgeon," I said slowly, "because I wanted to fix things. To take broken pieces and make them whole again." Richard squeezed my hand weakly. "You did that, sweetheart. You fixed yourself. And now you fix me too." But as I sat there, holding the hand of the man who'd shaped my childhood in ways I was only beginning to understand, I realized something profound. I hadn't just fixed Richard's heart on that operating table. I'd fixed something in myself too. The girl who'd sat in an unlocked basement, counting ceiling tiles and planning her escape, had grown up to become someone who could hold life and death in her hands. Someone who could choose mercy over revenge, healing over hurt. "There's something else," Richard said, his voice growing weaker. "In my wallet, there's a picture." My mother reached for his wallet on the bedside table, pulling out a worn photograph. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. It was a picture of me at my medical school graduation, taken from a distance. I was smiling, my diploma in hand, surrounded by classmates and professors. But what made my breath catch was the back of the photo. In Richard's shaky handwriting, "My daughter, the doctor. The girl who turned darkness into light." "You were there," I whispered. "I was always there," he said. "Every graduation, every award ceremony, every moment I could steal without intruding on your life. I was so proud, Nicole. So proud of who you became despite everything I couldn't give you." The monitors around his bed began to beat more rapidly. His blood pressure was dropping again, his heart struggling against the trauma of surgery and emotion. "I need to call the team," I said, starting to stand. But Richard's grip on my hand tightened with surprising strength.
"No," he said. "Please.
Just stay with me. Both of you." I looked at the monitors, at the numbers that told me his repaired heart was failing again. As a surgeon, I knew I should call for help, should fight to keep him alive at any cost. But as his daughter, and I realized now that I had always been his daughter, even in the basement, even in the silence, I understood what he was asking for. "Okay," I said, settling back into my chair. "I'll stay." My mother moved to his other side, and together we sat with him as the sun finished setting outside the ICU windows. The machines continued their electronic symphony, but softer now, less urgent. "Tell me about your patients," Richard whispered. "Tell me about the lives you've saved."
So I did.
I told him about the children with congenital heart defects who'd grown up to have families of their own, about the elderly patients who'd lived to see grandchildren born, about the young mother who'd survived a massive heart attack and danced at her daughter's wedding. As I spoke, I watched his face relax, saw something like peace settle over his features. The man who'd been too broken to love me properly was finding healing in the knowledge that his broken daughter had learned to heal others. "The basement," he said suddenly, his voice barely audible. "What did you think about down there? In the dark?" I smiled through my tears. I planned my future. I counted ceiling tiles and imagined myself in an operating room, saving lives. I dreamed of becoming someone who mattered. "You always mattered," he whispered. "From the very first day. You mattered so much it scared me." The monitors showed his heart rate slowing, his blood pressure dropping steadily. But his eyes remained clear, focused on my face with an intensity that reminded me of the child I'd been, studying his expressions for signs of approval or disappointment. "I forgive you," I said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside me, from the girl who'd learned to be strong in the darkness. "I forgive both of you." Richard's eyes closed, a single tear sliding down his cheek. "Thank you," he breathed. "Thank you for saving me. Not just today, but for becoming who you are despite who I was." The sun had fully set now, leaving the ICU bathed in the soft glow of monitors and machines. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm of life and death, of broken things being mended and whole things falling apart. But in this room, in this moment, 3 people who'd been fractured by love and fear and misunderstanding had found a way to be whole together. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. Richard's breathing grew shallower, his grip on my hand loosening. The monitors showed what I already knew. His heart, damaged by years of guilt and regret, was finally ready to rest. "I love you, Dad," I whispered, using the word I'd never been able to say before. His eyes opened one last time, meeting mine with perfect clarity. "I love you too, sweetheart. I always did. I just didn't know how to show you." The monitor flatlined at 11:47 p.m., the steady tone filling the room like a final prayer. But I didn't move to restart his heart, didn't call for the crash team. Instead, I sat holding his hand as my mother wept quietly beside me, and I thought about the girl in the basement who'd learned to count ceiling tiles instead of tears. She'd grown up to become someone who could hold death in her hands and choose when to fight it and when to let it come with grace. Someone who could forgive the unforgivable and find love in the spaces between words. The basement door was never locked. But more than that, it was never meant to be a prison. It was meant to be a cocoon, a place where a broken man's daughter could transform herself into someone who could heal the world. And in the end, that's exactly what she'd done. 3 months later, I stood in the basement of my childhood home, helping my mother pack away Richard's belongings. The space looked smaller than I remembered, less frightening. Just a basement, really. Nothing more. But on the wall, barely visible in the dim light, I found something that made me catch my breath. Scratched into the concrete, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, Nicole Carter, future doctor. Below it, in different handwriting, Richard's handwriting, someone had added, I believe in you. I traced the words with my finger, feeling the rough concrete beneath my touch. All those years, I'd thought I was alone in the darkness. But I hadn't been alone at all. Even when he couldn't be with me, even when his own brokenness kept him away, he'd been there in the only way he knew how. Believing in me, waiting for me to become who I was meant to be. The girl who'd counted ceiling tiles had grown up to save lives. And in the end, she'd saved the most important life of all, her own. The basement door stood open behind me, letting in light from upstairs. It had never been locked. It had always been my choice to stay or go. And now, finally, I was ready to leave.